This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. While the cameras are fixed on King Charles in America, another story is unfolding in the UK that could have far bigger consequences for politics, media influence, and the battle over online speech. You see, today, Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's most powerful political operator and the architect behind Labour's rise, is facing explosive scrutiny over his role in recommending Peter Mandelson to be appointed as the UK Ambassador to the United States. And this is not just another Westminster insider scandal that will quietly go away, because Morgan McSweeney is not some random political advisor. He is seen as an election strategist and an attack dog on political opponents. He is also the co-founder of CCDH, otherwise known as the Center for Countering Digital Hate. You know, the controversial organization that has crossed the pond infecting our politics and elections. This is the organization accused by critics in the United States of driving censorship campaigns, affecting U.S. policy, eroding the First Amendment, and coordinating pressure against dissenting voices online during the Biden-Harris regime, an organization Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been aligned with since 2019, leading up to the 2020 election, influencing outcomes. Now, let's go ahead and connect the dots. Last week, Prince Harry attended alongside McSweeney at the Kiev Security Forum in Ukraine. McSweeney was there to review how AI can be used in Ukraine elections. McSweeney reportedly assisted Camilla Harris's campaign operation back in 2024, and now the same network of political influence, media management, and counter-disinformation activism is sitting at the center of questions about transparency inside the UK government itself and the role it plays influencing other governments. So why is this Peter Mandelson appointment such a big deal? Well, it's because Mandelson has long represented the establishment globalist wing of Labour politics, heavily influenced by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, deeply connected to transatlantic power structures, elite institutions, and strategic messaging operations. His appointment was never about who could get along with Trump the best when it came to trade. This was really about putting somebody from the establishment right there in the heart of D.C. Now, the reason why this testimony is the most important out of all of these testimonies about this Mandelson appointment is because it cracks open the conversation as to who is actually shaping government policy behind the scenes. And the bigger question is, why is it being allowed? The agenda of what is being pushed by these globalists resembles nothing of what a so-called democracy is supposed to look like. And in today's video, you're going to see highlights from this testimony showing how these globalists and people like Morgan McSweeney have no issue lying their face off to cover their own skin, because they all know nothing is going to happen to them, just like what we saw with Meghan Markle when she committed perjury in the UK court system. All they have to do is give an excuse of, oopsie, I didn't mean to mislead the court, I just forgot, or I can't remember. Now, I've watched this 2.5-hour session this morning, so you don't have to, and pulled out a couple things so you can see that this guy is truly a snake in the grass, and it's no wonder that Harry and Meghan are connected to him.
The Foreign Affairs Committee are continuing their inquiry into the workings of the Foreign Office and the appointment of Peter Mandelson in particular. And we have just had a break, but we are now continuing our session with Morgan McSweeney. Thank you very much for coming. I understand, could you just introduce who you are? And I understand that there's a brief statement that you want to make before we ask you some questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Morgan McSweeney. I was a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Keir Starmer from October 2024 till February of this year. Chair, thank you for inviting me to appear before this committee today. I hope to assist you in your work as fully as I can. Before addressing the specific matters before you, I'm grateful that you've allowed me to say something briefly. First, I want to say something about the victims and survivors connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Too often, discussions of public figures and appointments can lose sight of the human suffering at the centre of these matters. Women and girls were abused, exploited and scarred. They deserved protection then, and they deserve to be remembered now. I'm sorry for any part this controversy has played in causing further hurt or distress. I've spent much of my working life trying, in whatever role I held, to make this country fairer, stronger and more successful. I have always believed public service is a privilege. It brings responsibility and scrutiny, but it also brings a meaningful chance to improve people's lives. That is what motivated me in government. The appointment of Mandelson as Ambassador was a serious error of judgement. I advised the Prime Minister in support of that appointment, and I was wrong to do so. As I said in my resignation statement, I resigned because I believe responsibility should rest with those who make serious mistakes. Accountability in public life cannot apply only when it is convenient. The Prime Minister relied on my advice, and I got it wrong. It is also important, however, to distinguish between what I did do and what I did not do. What I did do was make a recommendation based on my judgment that Mandelson's experience, relationships and political skills could serve the national interest in Washington at an important moment. That judgment was a mistake. What I did not do was oversee national security vetting, ask officials to ignore procedures, request that steps should be skipped, or communicate explicitly or implicitly that checks should be cleared at all costs. I would never have considered that acceptable. These processes are in place to protect our national security. Finally, I want to place on record my respect for those who serve our country through public institutions: MPs, ministers, civil servants, diplomats, security professionals and many others whose work is demanding, often unseen. In the Cabinet Office, the Foreign Office and 10 Downing Street, there will be many people working long hours now to understand what happened here and to ensure lessons are learned. They deserve fairness and respect as they do that work. Chair, I'm here to assist the committee in its work. I made a serious mistake in recommending Mandelson's appointment. I accept the consequences and hope today I can help the committee to establish the facts and to make sure the right lessons are learned.
Thank you. So why was it necessary to replace Karen Pearce at all?
So, should I set out the timetable of my understanding of the various different decision making? So,
I'm going to do that,
okay,
but I just wondered if I could just start with, how did it even become an issue?
So, my understanding is that before we were in government, the civil service were deciding who to appoint Karen Pearce when her term came to an end, and that in the access talks with Simon Case. Simon Case was informed that the Prime Minister was minded to make a political appointment in the role of Ambassador. So that predates my time as a Chief of Staff. At the time, I was working in opposition and I wasn't working as part of the transition team. When I came in as Chief of Staff, I understood that to be the general direction the Prime Minister wanted to go in, and that a formal decision was made not until after the US presidential elections, because he rightly wanted to wait until after seeing who was elected US President on the 5th of November.
So is there a note of the discussion around whether or not it should be a political appointment, or are you saying that it was something that had already been decided before Labour got into government?
So I only found out this weekend as I was trying to piece together the full picture, and I called Simon Case to ask him what his recollection was, and his recollection was that February 2024, when he was inquiring about what Labour might want to do with the US Ambassador, as they were considering who to replace Karen Pearce with, he was told the Prime Minister was minded to make a political appointment. As far as I know then, the next decision was taken in early November. So the decision by the Prime Minister was formally taken in early November after the US presidential election. So I've seen a box note that went from the Prime Minister's private office, his foreign policy private office and his PPS, and which asked him explicitly would he like to go ahead with a political appointment or make a civil service appointment. I don't recall any conversation about that, and then the next thing is that he is requesting who could potentially fill that post.
That's the box note of the 11th of November, which is on page 2 of the humble address materials.
I think if Camilla Harris had won that US presidential election, I don't think that Peter Mandelson would have necessarily been appointed, and he probably wouldn't have been. I think the Prime Minister started to seriously consider names after the US election.
Just so that we get the timeline right, you became head of office on the 6th of October.
Yes.
You really wanted Peter Mandelson to be the ambassador, didn't you?
I thought he was the right choice after the US presidential election. The reason why I thought he was the right choice is because Britain was exposed, the UK was exposed after Brexit. We left the European Union without any US trade deal. And for me, honestly, this was the top priority of the Prime Minister, was to get a US trade deal with the Americans. And I thought that based on Mandelson's experience as an EU Trade Commissioner, that made him the strongest candidate. But like everybody else, I made clear to the Prime Minister there was pros and cons, and there was risks. I don't think the Prime Minister would have chosen Mandelson if Camilla Harris had been elected president. I think he considered about who would be the right fit for the White.
I disagree. I think Peter Mandelson was going to be the UK ambassador to the US one way or another. Look at what he was doing beforehand. He was with the EU as the trade commissioner. Obviously, if they really want us to believe that they picked this person so he can get along with Donald Trump and trade, they would have picked somebody who was not part of the globalist system. Kamala Harris was fully on board with working with these globalists and selling out America's sovereignty. Peter Mandelson would have been the perfect fit for Kamala Harris, and no doubt we would have gotten effed. Because with whatever trade deal Mandelson was planning to help with, it would have only benefited the globalists. And that's why there was this hard push to get this guy in there. It wasn't to serve UK interests. It was to serve these globalists.
I'll come on to that in a minute. But I mean, you wanted, I mean, it was more than that. It was personal as well, wasn't it? I mean, he was your mentor, particularly when you became Chief of Staff, because you had no experience of the weird and wonderful world of Whitehall, but obviously Peter Mandelson did. So didn't he become an indispensable and venerated confidant for you?
He was a confidant for me, but I don't beg pardon. But I didn't regard him as my mentor. I first had a conversation with Peter Mandelson in 2017. I don't think I really started to go to him for advice until about 2021, and I was 44 years of age then. So I didn't regard him at all as a mentor. I got advice from him, and it was useful. But I also had other people around who were perhaps a bit more shy with the media, who I sought to for advice. We brought in some extremely experienced people from the Blair administration. So Liz Lloyd came into our team, Jonathan Powell came into our team, and I would certainly ask both of those for advice about how things work as well. So I asked a range of people for advice and help.
A man by the name of Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, arguably the most important and the most powerful person in British politics. In fact, without Morgan McSweeney, there simply is no Keir Starmer. And this is the story of how he got that power, and how we used a secret, unlawful fund of over £700,000 to seize that power. This web of secrecy and these backroom deals should terrify anybody who cares about British democracy. About 4 years ago, in 2021, I got access to a phenomenal leak of documents out of the Labour Party. That sparked my investigation into Morgan McSweeney and the Labour Party, an incredible story of the reckless and arguably lawless project that has delivered us this particular Keir Starmer government. Between 2017 and 2020, Morgan McSweeney ran an undisclosed secret project to destroy the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. He did so with a pot of money, £730,000, he wasn't declaring as required by law to the Electoral Commission. While he was running the secret project, he wrote to the Electoral Commission and spoke to them over the phone and said, I don't want to report donations. And the Electoral Commission said, I'm sorry, you have to report donations. And in February 2020, Shabana Mahmood, who's currently the Home Secretary, said on Labour Together's behalf, yes, we are reporting donations. Labour Together was a seemingly anodyne think tank that Morgan McSweeney ran for a number of years. Labour Together really came into play after Corbyn's Labour Party exceeded all expectations in the general election of 2017. But for people like Morgan McSweeney, this wasn't something to be celebrated. This was a threat. See, Morgan McSweeney is from the right wing of the Labour Party, And Jeremy Corbyn's success was a threat to his own personal political ambitions and to his vision for the Labour Party. For a period of 3 years, Morgan McSweeney used Labour Together to undertake secret projects to destroy the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, secret projects that inflamed the anti-Semitism crisis that would undermine his reputation, but also to ensure that Keir Starmer was elected leader of the Labour Party. To do that, Morgan McSweeney needed serious money. And between 2017 and late 2020, Labour Together accepted over £800,000 in donations. Of that amount, £730,000 was not reported as required by law to the Electoral Commission. As a result, nobody had any idea that Labour Together, under Morgan McSweeney's control, was taking £730,000 from a series of multi-millionaires. Two of those people who gave the money were Trevor Chin and Martin Taylor. So Trevor Chin is a wealthy UK businessman. One of his animating concerns is Israel. For the last 30 years, he's been actively involved in pro-Israel politics. He's been connected and linked to the Labour Friends of Israel. In fact, early in 2025, Trevor Chin was awarded the Israeli Presidential Medal of Honor for services to the country of Israel. The other donor was a man by the name of Martin Taylor, a very secretive, wealthy hedge fund owner who has interest in private healthcare. One of the weird things about Morgan McSweeney is that he's never been interviewed properly. You'll never find a quote from him in the media. He's never been on TV to explain his beliefs or his philosophy or what he's done in the past. In all my years of researching Morgan McSweeney, I've only ever found one video of him. Here's Morgan McSweeney speaking to an assembled crowd of the Labour Great and Good, telling them about how Labour Together was trying to seek unity in the party.
It's a network of people from across the party, from different traditions, that look to what are long-term challenges facing the Labour Party and the country and how we overcome them.
Nothing could be further from the truth. Because at that time, Morgan McSweeney's plan to burn down the Labour Party, to undermine it from within, to capture the Labour Party from the ashes, to install their own chosen leader, and then eradicate the left wing from the Labour Party was well advanced. What we can now reveal is that Morgan McSweeney was, and is, very close to Peter Mandelson, the best pal of the notorious sex pest and paedophile Jeffrey Epstein.
I don't regard Mandelson as ever being a mentor, but certainly as an advisor.
So, I mean, when the New Statesman says that Morgan wouldn't breathe without consulting Peter Mandelson first, that's not fair.
Yeah, you'll forgive me if I don't believe everything that's written about me in the papers, but I don't think that was true. He was somebody who I sought for advice, but both when I was campaign director and as chief of staff, I built a wide network of people who had done jobs similar to mine in the past, going back decades in the Labour Party.
And I will go into. I mean, I really wanted to just sort of start with. I mean, you began by working for Excalibur, didn't you? Which was run by Peter Mandelson. It was an attack and rebuttal unit, basically, in '97, and you worked on that. And one of the things was to also do work on Labour MPs who might be perceived as disloyal.
So, again, Chair, I'm glad that I can correct some of the records on this, because this is all a bit of a mythos here.
This comes from the Independent.
Yes. So I was an intern at the Labour Party in the 2001 general election. I was an intern. I was assigned to the attack and rebuttal team.
So you didn't work in '97 for Excalibur?
No, I did.
So 2001 was your first time.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And my job. And I hate to dispel the myth to maybe some people from different political parties about what Excalibur was, but all I did was glue bits of newspaper to A4 paper and scan it into a machine. Mm-hmm. It was.
We've all done it.
Literally, that was as sophisticated as my job got.
In fact, one of McSweeney's first jobs at Labour was inputting data into Peter Mandelson's much-feared Excalibur computer system. Peter Mandelson has said of Morgan McSweeney, "I don't know who and how and when he was invented, but whoever it was, they will find their place in heaven."
The team wasn't run by Mandelson. The team was run by Spencer Livermore, right. And it included lots of future Labour politicians and SPADs. I never met or spoke to Mandelson in that election, and I didn't even report into who is now Lord Livermore. It was much more junior people that I reported into.
Keir Starmer, Labour Together and Morgan McSweeney were immediately ready to swing into action. They were able to present a pitch of Keir Starmer as a radical eco-socialist, an inheritor of the Corbynite tradition, a man who would nationalise key industries, who would bring in a Green New Deal, that he would unite the party and end factionalism. but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, as we now know, as soon as Keir Starmer became leader, he ditched all of his 10 pledges.
You made 10 policy pledges for this campaign. Let's see how watertight they are. Can you guarantee that under your leadership, the 2019 Labour commitments to nationalise water, energy, rail, the Royal Mail, they'll all be in Labour's next election manifesto?
I've made that commitment.
Will you nationalise the big 6 energy companies, yes or no?
No.
No, you will not.
The fraudulent pitch that Keir Starmer offered was based entirely on Morgan McSweeney's vision of him polling the membership, understanding what needed to be said to get Labour members to vote for a leader who would then betray them. Morgan McSweeney was absolutely central to that campaign. One of the absolutely remarkable things was that through the entire period he was overseeing Keir Starmer's election campaign, he was still the company secretary of Labour Together. And in fact, during the period of Keir Starmer's leadership campaign, Labour Together was still taking in donations that Morgan McSweeney was failing.
All right, well, let's go back to the appointment of him as ambassador. So there were a number of problems before he could become ambassador to the United States. I mean, the first being that he wanted to be Chancellor of Oxford and ambassador at the same time. So, I mean, he said on a podcast, the Times Pod, on the 12th of the 11th, 24, that he thought that he could do both jobs. Now, is it right that you asked for official advice on whether or not the role of ambassador to the United States could be part-time?
I don't recall, but I don't recall that I asked if it could be part-time.
So I'm relying in particular on an article in The Observer on the 4th of February 26. Morgan McSweeney sought official advice over whether Peter Mandelson, who resigned from the Lords this week in disgrace, could be the UK ambassador to the US and Chancellor of the University of Oxford at the same time, sources have claimed.
I don't have any recollection of it.
And officials had to explain that being His Majesty's ambassador in Washington was a full-time job in Washington.
So I do remember thinking that at the time, that it was a full-time job. I understood that. So, like I said, at the time that he was doing that, I think that had Camilla Harris won the US presidential elections, I don't think he would have got the job. He was certainly lobbying for the job. He did, but I think that Oxford University shows he was also hedging because he didn't know whether he was going to get it or didn't think he was going to get it. So he was also looking at other opportunities. He did say to me when he was saying to me that he was interested in the job, that he was also going for Oxford University. And my view to him was these are incompatible. I don't see how you could do both.
So if you're telling him that it's incompatible, then you wouldn't be asking for official advice on whether he could do it part-time?
I don't think I would have, but I can't say for certain if I...
Why wouldn't you remember something like that? I mean, it is pretty interesting.
I can't remember doing so. So I think you're right. I would have I'd remember it if I would have, but I can't remember ever doing so.
Okay.
I don't recall ever meeting him.
Did you ever meet Ghislaine Maxwell?
I did on a few occasions, and thousands of people go to the Clinton Global Initiative. So,
is it true that Mr. Epstein oversaw your prenuptial agreement?
I don't recall that I had one. I think the answer is none. I can't remember anybody that he would have met that I hired personally. I'm thinking also business and household staff, people like that. No, I can't think of an exception.
I will repeat the question again. Did Miss Maxwell ever visit your home in Chappaqua?
I don't recall, but it's quite possible she did. Hillary was a senator. In the beginning, she had a lot of events there. And we knew her.
During the same exchange, Miss Maxwell implies that she may have been just driving past Chappaqua and stopped in if you were home. Did this ever occur? If you don't.
Not that I remember, but I may not have been home.
But Mr. President, is it common for people to just stop by your house?
No.
I mean, one of the other problems was that Keir didn't like him. I mean, again, for the New Statesman, Keir doesn't even like him and never really has. He's not Keir's sort of person. And the Foreign Office definitely didn't like him, as far as we can tell. And then, of course, there's all the red flags. So all of these things are problems, getting in the way of Peter Mandelson becoming ambassador. But you still wanted him to be ambassador, right?
See, Morgan McSweeney is from the right wing of the Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn's success was a threat to his own personal political ambitions and to his vision for the Labour Party.
At the time in Downing Street, there was conversations about who could be the best candidate, and names were considered, and most people were making pros and cons arguments. I have to say, I know that a lot of people now say they told the Prime Minister they were against it at the time.
To report. This is the man who is now Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. This is the man, the most powerful man in the UK. How is this unelected man, a man who can't even speak to the press, who nobody has voted for, has so much power, when we now know for the entire period he was leading Keir Starmer's Labour leadership campaign, he was still the Company Secretary of Labour Together, and in fact failing to report donations as required by the law to the Electoral Commission. In 2021, the Electoral Commission initiated an investigation into Labour Together. It confirmed that yes, Labour Together had failed to report donations. Yes, that broke the law. At the time, however, Labour Together were very clear. They said this was all a terrible oversight, an administrative oversight, a series of human errors, a terrible, terrible mistake. In fact, my investigation has come across evidence that I think plausibly raises the question as to whether Morgan McSweeney purposefully didn't declare those donations. That is, whether Morgan McSweeney purposefully broke the law over a number of years. The implications of this would potentially be profound. To understand my skepticism, you first have to start with the project that he was running. The month after the Labour Party had secured its incredible 40% share of the vote in 2017, he met with a series of Labour Together insiders in his office, including the MP Steve Reid. He presented what he called a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threat analysis, a SWOT analysis.
Can I suggest something to you? That you wanted him to be ambassador, and so what you did was you bided your time for the first 6 weeks after your appointment of head of office, and then you went for it. I mean, as Jonathan Powell has said, it was weirdly rushed. I don't think it was rushed at all. What I would suggest is that it was part of a strategy. It's used in warfare, it's used in boxing, it's used in political campaigns. You go fast and you go hard and you confuse your opponents and you get what you want. You appreciate that. I mean, you are an expert in strategy. I mean, that is a strategy that is used sometimes.
That wasn't any strategy that I deployed.
So let's look at this evidence. Between 2017 and 2020, Morgan McSweeney ran an undisclosed secret project to destroy the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. He did so with a pot of money, £730,000, he wasn't declaring as required by law to the Electoral Commission. While he was running the secret project, he wrote to the Electoral Commission and spoke to them over the phone and said, I don't want to report donations. And the Electoral Commission said, I'm sorry, you have to report donations. Then he told MPs in 2019 that he was, in fact, reporting donations. And then on Labour Together's website in April 2019, they said, yes, we are reporting donations. And in February 2020, Shabana Mahmood said on Labour Together's behalf, yes, we are reporting donations. How believable is it that in this entire period, Morgan McSweeney was simply forgetting to report donations when he was telling everyone who would listen that he was doing so?
Reported by, I think it's Sam Coates, that the Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, rang Sir Philip and said, in terms stronger than those that I can use before the watershed.
I think you should.
Well, I'll just say that it was just to prove it with terms stronger than that. Does that accord with your impression?
Just fucking approve it.
Does it accord with your impression when you took over from Sir Philip?
I think I recall Philip saying to me, certainly Philip's handover to me has contributed to my strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this DV process.
It was rumoured last autumn, that the communication between yourself and Sir Ollie Robbins was assertive, emphatic, sweary even, and you've denied that. How did you communicate to the FCDO the desire from Number 10 to speed up the approval of Mandelson's developed vetting?
Thank you, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to answer this. I'm firstly very, very grateful to Sir Philip Barton for what he said about this swearing rumour. It is something that has caused me a great deal of stress for a number of months. I don't know why people do this in politics, put around untrue rumours. They phone lots of journalists. Those journalists then phone lots of politicians. That's how rumours get around. It is very, very corrosive. It's damaging for people's reputation, and a lot of people in Number 10 get that, and I think it's unfair for staff who can't speak for themselves. I'm grateful as well to the journalists, the vast majority of whom never covered that story because it wasn't true, and I'm so glad that Sir Philip Barton said today that I did not phone him, that he has no recollection of me swearing at him, and I have no recollection of swearing at him either. I denied it when I was repeatedly asked about it by journalists. Most journalists did not touch the story and showed a lot of integrity on that, and I think it's one of the most corrosive things that happens in politics. So I'm glad I got the chance to set the record straight. I did not swear at Sir Philip Barton. I did not swear at Sir Ollie Robbins either. And in his testimony he said that I didn't call him, I didn't text him, I didn't email him. So I was not talking to Sir Ollie Robbins about this issue, and I have to say that because of what's happened, we're rightly all focusing on precisely what happened with this appointment. But I can tell you, in January 2025, this wasn't one of my most important issues. There was far more serious issues affecting the government and the country in January 2025 than the start date of an ambassador.
All the while, Morgan McSweeney was working secretly to inflame the tensions between those factions and destroy the left-wing leadership of the Labour Party by working secretly with journalists to place attack stories on Jeremy Corbyn.
I don't know why people do this in politics, put around untrue rumours. They phone lots of journalists. Those journalists then phone lots of politicians. That's how rumours get around. It is very, very corrosive. It's damaging for people's reputation, and a lot of people in Number 10 get that, and I think it's unfair for staff who can't speak for themselves.
For me, the SWOT analysis is all important, because the SWOT analysis provides motive. Morgan McSweeney was terrified of people discovering what he was really doing. At the same time, he is not reporting donations to the Electoral Commission.
I would hope by now many of you see how this is a complete... Now, I would hope by now you see how this is a thuggish international network that the globalists literally are funding to drive outcomes of what our society is going to look like. And this society that is being forced onto us by these globalists are going to stop at nothing. Here you have a situation where Morgan McSweeney needs to be called before Congress to answer some questions, especially his involvement with the Democrats and these oligarchs that fund and give money to do this dirty work. Same thing with Harry. But you see, it's the same names coming up time and time again, and the pattern and behavior of all of them is pretty much identical. This is no longer just a British scandal. It's a system-level confrontation over who controls the truth and whether foreign operators, that include royal help, can bypass the First Amendment. And the reason why no one from the media is touching this, as well as Niall Gardner from the Heritage Foundation, is that they know that this is a diplomatic fallout. That's why they're hustling to get these laws put into place so they can shut us all up. This is going to get worse for Starmer, and I would not be surprised if Starmer steps down after the king comes back from his trip. And I think if that ends up happening, it will be because of Donald Trump advising the king in their private tea to get rid of him. Let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content, but until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
It was such a fraud.